all of us, wherever we are, to come together and to share our experiences as we navigate through this extraordinary pandemic. It's the first time in all of human history where virtually everyone, everywhere, is undergoing the same experience. And the extraordinary thing about that is it's put the whole world in the same conversation. And the conversation is, how do we come together in a way that makes the world beyond the pandemic more sustainable and resilient, abundant, healthy, and in alignment with natural systems? As we look around the world, the World Health Organization has said that COVID rates continue to increase worldwide. We're now beyond 11 million. We have some countries like the United States where the rates are skyrocketing still after 5 months now of the pandemic. Other parts of the world are beginning to stabilize with a flatter curve, but still most of us are in some form of lockdown. Most of us are still wearing masks in public to some degree, engaging in social distancing. So the pandemic is still very much with us. And I'd like to just tease out two little data points that have been in the news over the last couple of days. One is that you'll all remember that about 2 months ago, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, a young Black man killed by a white police officer. And even though it's not in the news so much, protests and activism continue to manifest. And the government in the United States continues to crack down in increasingly draconian ways. Many of you have been tracking the news in Portland, and just this last night in Seattle. In Portland, they've been continuously protesting police brutality since the death of George Floyd. And the federal government, the Trump administration, has been using really Gestapo tactics. People have been disappeared in unmarked cars by unmarked police officer and are still gone. And all kinds of police brutality is being deployed now on the streets of America. And it's just important that we all take in the reverberative effects of this pandemic. The effect of this pandemic is to kind of send shockwaves through the global system. And some countries more than others. But that leads me now to the second point that I think is very important for us all to take in. Just overnight, Hurricane Hannah swept out of the Gulf of Mexico onto Texas as a Category 3 hurricane and hit one of the worst COVID areas in the United States, in southern Texas. And that is one of the things that we all need to be taking in, is that extreme weather events, the rise of additional infectious diseases, turbulence of all kind will now continue to escalate and pile one on top of the other until we change the course of human affairs. And that's why we convened Humanity Rising. We want to make sure that there's an opportunity every day for people of goodwill to come together, because scientists are telling us the human race is running out of time. That's what's true. That's what's true. And so the question of strategic effectiveness in a diminishing time frame with escalating crises from multiple domains is the only real question humanity should be talking about right now. In April, something phenomenal happened. And that is that the city of Amsterdam announced that coming out of the pandemic, they were going to use donut economics to shape the future of that city. Other cities from around the world, including Copenhagen, as we heard yesterday, and Cali, Colombia, as we heard yesterday, dozens and dozens of other communities are now beginning to embrace donut economics. So even though things are getting worse and worse, things are also getting better and better, and everything is happening faster and faster. That's our world on the 26th of July, 2020. And so what we have put together, we're now on our fourth day working with Edward Muller, who's the founder and president of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica, and a lifelong environmental activist who has been really working in the field of regenerative economics as a major national program in Costa Rica to get Costa Rica to go donuts, offered to convene a whole 7-day event for Humanity Rising on donut economics, on regenerative economics, which we're going to hear about today, alternative economic theories and practices, all with the purpose of inspiring all of us, wherever we are, to embrace a way of life that puts human well-being at the center and ecological systems and constraints on the periphery. If the human race would focus on that single proposition, how do we create human abundance so we all thrive? And we do so within the ecological order, within ecological constraints. Just imagine what a world we could create. That's the aspiration of Humanity Rising. So thank you all for joining. We want to now invite all of you who are on the Zoom lines to be active in the chats. The panel will interact with you. We'll get as many of your questions as we possibly can. And to the 15, 20,000 of you that are watching through our live streaming partners, most particularly the Sign Network, Awake TV, we want to welcome you as well. And now I'll turn over the program to Ed Muller. Ed.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for that introduction. It really put us in tune with what we're actually trying to achieve these days. We have some of the most brilliant minds in regenerative economics and related aspects today. So I don't want to really spend too much time talking myself. And actually, I'd rather ask each of the presenters to say a few words about themselves. That would be probably the most time efficient resource. So I'll invite first John Fullerton, founder and CEO of Capital Institute. I mean, John has been one of the leading people in all this regeneration movement focused on regenerative economics, really holistic approaches to basically regenerating any bioregion. But please, John, come on in, and the floor is yours. If you can say a few words about yourself, if you want to. And there, thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning to everyone, wherever you are. And thanks, Edward and Jim. That was a brilliant framing for the kind of the moment we're at here. And I saw in the chat someone asked for a quick recap on what is donut economics, and I'll try to address that as I go through this. Let me just give everyone a quick context of who I am and kind of where I come from. It's a little unconventional for perhaps this conversation, but maybe also hopeful. I spent 20 years on Wall Street at what I call the old JP Morgan. I left in 2001, and not long after that, I read a book called Limits to Growth, which is the important Club of Rome analysis of what happens when you continue exponential economic growth on a finite planet. And not that a literal pandemic was predicted, at least as I recall, but the cascading crises that we're now experiencing and have been experiencing, if we look back at it for, in my opinion, at least 20 years, were predicted. And I believe with every bone in my body that the root cause of that is not, bad capitalists and bad people, but an economic system design that's predicated on false assumptions and belief systems that are simply in conflict with the laws of nature, as well as conflict with what we all aspire to as human beings. And again, not because the people driving that are bad people, perhaps ignorant, but not bad, even though there are bad people in all walks of life. And so we really have an intellectual challenge and a existential challenge, because the way we thought the world, and certainly the way I thought how the world could be and needed to be organized is fundamentally flawed. And I can't, I'm just going to pull up a couple of pictures here while we're doing this, which will, I think, help. Here we go. Bear with me one sec. We can't really appreciate that or let me just say differently. Is that working, by the way?
It's not full screen. You actually have a
Okay.
screen here. Your main screen is the one that's showing this probably.
Where's slideshow? There we go. How's that?
Now there. Yeah.
That's full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So one simple way to, in a sense, prove that our core economic ideology is fundamentally flawed is to note that a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to William Nordhaus at Yale for his extensive work he's done on climate change. And he's developed a model which was the recipient of the award, which calculated that the optimal global warming goal we should set is 3.5 degrees Celsius, because anything lower would cause too much disruption to economic growth and therefore cost too much. So here you have at the same time the IPCC group of climate scientists developing a consensus that 2 degrees and really 1.5 degrees, and from my understanding, probably 1.5 degrees is too much, ought to be humanity's goal. We, the economics profession, award the Nobel Prize to someone who says, no, 3.5 is the right goal because anything less would cost too much. And I would argue, if I had more time, that the grotesque inequality crisis and certainly the issues of racism in our country and others, and now this pandemic, are all rooted in this same flawed understanding of how to organize human societies and in particular human economies. And as Jim nicely shared with us, this is not a problem we need to solve the way we're used to solving problems. This is actually a systemic crisis. And when you're dealing with complex systems, and I would argue the human economy is certainly a complex system, as is the planet itself, the living systems that make up planet Earth, and as is human societies. They're all complex systems. And again, that's a whole field of study we don't have time to get into today, but it's a defined term, it's a thing, complexity. What we do in our natural tendency is to say, well, what's the problem? And let's then reduce the problem into simple pieces that we can get our hands around and solve the problem. So we're out trying to solve climate change, and now we're out trying to solve the pandemic, and we're racing for a cure, a vaccine that will make this pandemic go away. The problem is that the root of rising viruses that will move around the world are very much linked to our expansionist, ever-expanding economic system. So even if we solve this pandemic with a magical cure, there'll be another one. And so unless we get to the root causes, whether it's of pandemics, of desertification of the land, of the world's soils, obviously climate change, and this, brutal and brutalizing and unbearable inequality now, where this pandemic is hitting, and now, as Jim said, the pandemic and climate change is hitting in the most vulnerable populations. We don't have a viable pathway to solve these issues. And I believe if we don't move in this direction, humanity is very much at risk of some form of collapse. And I go around saying that we're experiencing some form of collapse already. And so before we rush into solutions and goals and policies and how to implement, I'm constantly trying to remind us we need to get clear on first principles of complexity and what we're trying to accomplish. And so this idea of regenerative economics, which I first articulated my ideas on this in a paper in 2015. So I've been at this for a while. If I was any good at it, it would already be understood. But I believe we need to start very much with the basics, which is that the systems that have sustained themselves in this world that we do understand are living systems. And so and human beings are living systems. And the magic of sustainability in living systems is that they continually regenerate. And so my hypothesis is, unless we create an economic system that's aligned with nature's laws and aligned with this regenerative process, we actually will simply be putting band-aids on problems rather than getting to the root cause of our situation. So you can read what I would put forth as a definition of regenerative economics. I don't need to read it. What I do need to stress is that if you study the wisdom traditions, particularly Eastern and in particular indigenous wisdom traditions, you'll see a tremendous similarity between this idea of regenerative economics and the wisdom that we've held in human cultures for the longest. That gives me affirmation that we're directionally moving in the right direction. And in a sense, it's remembering what we've always known and updating it for the modern context. One way to think about regenerative design and why that's different than sustainability is that a move from a degenerative system like we have today on the left in the brown is designed in a modern context, literally modern age context of mechanistic and reductionist thinking, where we reduce things into the parts. And a holistic approach to understanding living systems on the right is how natural systems are understood. And we talk about patterns as opposed to parts. And we also need to move from a lower level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness if we're to realize this possibility of regenerative systems. And in the process, we'll move from a high energy and material throughput system to a low energy and material throughput system. So one way to think about it is that the regenerative process over on the right is what leads to sustainability as an outcome. And in the paper, I articulate 8 principles, or maybe better said as qualities of a regenerative economy. These are derived from my study of living system science. These aren't the correct 8 principles. There are no correct 8 principles. This is just one person's best attempt to articulate something that is not reducible to any number of single descriptions. But it's proved to be useful both in thinking about how to migrate an individual business from a degenerative state to a regenerative state, as well as to migrate entire bioregions from a degenerative state to a regenerative state. And here, going back to the idea of the donut for me is Kate's brilliant articulation of the goals of the system we need into a beautiful visual. We have scientifically documented planetary boundaries. Those need to be understood as a constraint for this, ever-growing economic system, so that we don't breach, or if we have breached in many cases, we get back inside these boundaries. And yet there's also a social floor, an inner floor below which it's unacceptable morally to move. I like to also point out that one can have different values. One can have conservative values, and leaving aside America's current problem with Trump, which is not about conservative values, but one can have conservative values or progressive values, but one can't debate the law of gravity. And I want to see the world move toward a state where the conservative, well-intended conservative ideologies are debating with the well-intended progressive ideologies about how best to move toward a regenerative economy. Because I think these principles can speak to both well-intended conservative as well as progressive values. And so it's not just a moral imperative, although my moral belief system is probably highly aligned with progressive thinking. But just to put it, for example, the principle of empowered participation means that a living system, the whole system, is only healthy if all participants in the system are self-empowered to participate in the health of the system. So for example, you go think about your own body. Your body is only as healthy as your feet are empowered to participate in the circulation of oxygen in your body. That's not a moral belief system about my poor feet. We need to make sure that they get some blood. I can't walk, I can't run if my feet don't work or don't have oxygen. And so I suffer if my feet aren't contributing to the health of my body, because I want to be able to run and be healthy. And in the same way, if we have grotesque inequality, I would argue the health of the whole system can't possibly thrive. And that's exactly what we're experiencing today. And if you're interested in this, go to capitalinstitute.org. There's lots of information about this concept and all these 8 principles. And I think you'll see how I would suggest that relying on these first principles or qualities as our roadmap to move from the degenerative state of our economies to a regenerative state of our economies, and to regenerative businesses and to regenerative bioregions, is sort of the roadmap or the North Star or the guiding principles that we can refer to as we move into complexity. Because one thing we know about complexity is there'll be a new quote unquote problem tomorrow. And so the solutions to today's problem are not going to be the same as the solutions to tomorrow's problem. But the first principles, because they're aligned with living systems, are defined by living systems. Those are the constant. And that, what I argue, should be our ground zero. And why don't I leave it at that and continue the discussion with my colleagues here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. Yeah, the shift to holistic approaches is the basis of what really has to happen. I will go right away to Christian Felber, the founder and brain behind the economy of the common good. Christian, please take the floor. Can you hear me, Christian? Oh, I think.
Hey, Ed, he has his camera and his audio turned off. I'll try and get him.
Okay.
Look at him. Want me to keep talking? Got terrible light here.
Yeah, you get sunshine on your.
Yeah, I got to
On your-
move.
Yeah,
Christian,
John-
Ed, Christian's here now.
okay.
No, it's the other Christian, but I see he's offline. I think his internet collapsed. But let's move to this Christian then, and see when Christian Felber can get back on.
Okay.
He's back. He's back. Let's see. He's connecting.
I asked him to connect his video.
Give it a few more seconds. If not, we start with Christian with a K. There. Christian is up in the mountains in South Germany. His connection is not too good. Okay. Yeah. Christian, can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm back. I was kicked out by the connection, but now I'm back. I can hear you. Sorry. The floor is mine, you said?
Yes.
Thank you.
You speak.
Thank you very much for inviting. Sorry for the technical inconvenience. My name is Christian Felber. I'm Austrian, holistic thinker, very similar to John. I wrote 15 books on reforming the economy. Last one is about reforming economic science. And I'm the initiator of the movement Economy for the Common Good, which we founded 10 years ago and which spread to 33 countries over the last 10 years. Edward invited us to Costa Rica. There we met first, and now this is the second chance to collaborate. Economy for the Common Good is one of the new sustainable economic models that are in discussion. There are many of them. Tapas means there are plenty of alternatives. It's an alternative to the slogan, Tina, there is no alternative. And here you see some of these new sustainable economic models and approaches. One, of course, is the donut economics as a science and the donut economy as a practice, which is virtually in every aspect aligned with the economy for the common good. We consider ourselves as a holistic initiative and a project. Once we have a theory of change with 20 cornerstones that propose to either reform or maintain concrete aspects of the economy. Second, we are a lively movement in 33 countries, which comprises companies, municipalities, ever more cities, universities, and first and foremost, individual citizens. And third, we have proposed a democratic process to implement what others and we ourselves are proposing in a situation of the so-called post-democracy that Colin Crouch proposed and analyzed. And our response to that is a sovereign democracy that would give more rights and more power to the people. When we talk about system change, we recommend to define what the system is and what the system change as a consequence is. And here you see many aspects of the mosaic of the system change. And the two ones in red are the most relevant ones to us. First, on which value system is your proposal based? And then how is the legal framework supporting and promoting one or another idea of the real economy? The value system is in red because the dominant economic science of today, neoclassical economics, tells from itself in economic education that it's value-free. And this is a great illusion because there is no idea of the economy that is value-free. In every idea about the economy, a value system or a belief system, a moral belief system, as John said, is inherently embedded. And there is only the choice if you're conscious about it and transparent about it or intransparent. And then you tend to become an ideology. And other Scientists from economic science investigated which are the values that neoclassical economics is spreading and propagating in economic education today. And the outcome of that scientific research is that it's a value system of 5 values: utility maximization of egoistic individuals, competition orientation, pursuit of financial goals, first and foremost, materialism, consumerism, and growth in the meaning of GDP growth. And that's interesting because these 5 values, none of them you will find in a democratic constitution as a fundamental value. And the economy for the common good, of course, like other alternative economic approaches, is based on a value system. This is our core, our heart, but we make it transparent and we say it's based on human dignity, on solidarity and justice, on regeneration and sustainability and resilience, and on democracy itself. But what happens is that the neoclassical economists say that this is non-scientific because it's normative, because it relies on values. And this is a great misunderstanding, which makes reforms within the current scientific mainstream a bit difficult. And the legal framework is the second one, because it implements that belief system. It doesn't implement natural laws, which neoclassical economists make us believe that political rules only promote what nature shows us on markets, but nature doesn't show us anything on markets. All so-called market laws are man-made laws, and so political rules implement one or other belief system. And the current legal framework of the economy is bouncing in the discussion, or until recently was bouncing between capitalism and socialism. Everybody who did not agree with capitalism was automatically called a socialist, as if there was nothing in between. John's approach, Kate's approach, our approach, many other approaches. And you see in the quote below the line that prominent economists took us away the freedom of thinking to imagine alternatives. Ludwig von Mises was the doctor father of Friedrich August von Hayek. And Friedrich August von Hayek, for those who don't know him, one of the Austrian economists, was one of the senior economists of Margaret Thatcher. And one of his most famous students, Milton Friedman, was senior economist of Ronald Reagan. And they did a lot of effort to make us believe that there is only capitalism and socialism. And the economy for the common good is right in between. It's an alternative to both. It picks up markets and private property and money, but puts limits and conditions. And it picks up collective decision-taking, solidarity, and democracy, but not making it absolute in this, and is consequently equidistant from socialism as it is from capitalism. And you see it's green because it's regenerative. It's the donut implemented. It's a deeply sustainable economic model. And if you're surprised that you see Aristotle as the spirit rector of the economy for the common good, then we should remember something which in economic education usually is not reminded of, although it should be in every textbook of economics. Aristotle distinguished 2 different concepts of the economy. The first one is oikonomia. There's where the term economy and economist and economics come from. And he said, in a true economy, the goal is the well-being of all household members or the common good, and capital and money are just means. And if this relationship gets inverted or perverted, if making money or increasing capital becomes a goal in and of itself, then this by definition is not economy anymore. It turns into its opposite, which he called χρηματιστική, the art of making money and getting rich. And today we call it capitalism. And Aristotle's message is that capitalism and economy are opposites. I think that's an extremely helpful insight, which should be just informed about in economic textbooks. The economy for the common good picks up the meaning of the ancient economy and says the economy is not an independent area of life. It's deeply embedded, same vision as the donut, in democratic societies with their existing values and in the broader ecological context. It serves consequently as a tool, as a means, and should serve the common good as the overarching goal, and not consider money making as the objective of economic activities. If we go back to contemporary constitutions, we see that all democratic constitutions that tell us anything about the overarching goal of economic activities have opted for economy rather than capitalism. Otherwise, in the first example of the Bavarian Constitution, it would say the economic activity in its entirety serves the accumulation of capital. It doesn't say that. It says that the goal is the common good, and capital in the last line is just a means for that. If we translate this into economic practice, into real life economy, that the common good is the goal and money and capital are just means, then we would have to change the way we measure success in the economy, because today we measure success primarily with monetary indicators, but these indicators do not measure the achievement of the goal. The achievement of the goal would be measured like this, with a common good product, with a common good balance sheet for companies, and a common good assessment for investments. Whereas the today most widely used success indicators such as GDP, profit, and ROI, they do not measure the achievement of the goal. They measure the availability of means or the accumulation of means, or they measure the achievement of the goal in a capitalistic order, which we don't want if we pay attention to our constitutions. The proposal of our movement is that the common good product could be composed directly by the citizens. We already have a better life index. We already have a gross national happiness. We already deal with the sustainable development goals, which are 17 instead of 1. GDP is just 1. Our proposal is that the sovereign citizens compose directly their what makes up a good life for everybody, a high quality of life, the common good. We could use the 20 most favored ones into the common good product. And then we could derive the common good balance sheet for companies and the common good exam for investments. We did the second one with the best available democratic results of the moment. At the moment, the best available democratic results are the fundamental values that are anchored in our constitutions, in our democratic constitutions. Once again, you will not find egoism or utility maximization or competition or GDP growth in a single constitution on the planet. But you will find what you see in the green line: human dignity, solidarity and justice, environmental sustainability, and transparency and co-determination as fundamental democratic values in our constitutions. And our proposal is to measure how consequently and to which degree an organization like a company, but also others like a city, is really living these values according to all its stakeholders, from suppliers to future generations. And now comes the difference to classical sustainability reports. We propose that the result should be measurable and comparable, not only visible to consumers and investors, that they can make a more informed choice, but also differentiable for policymakers, in order that we can correct the perverted incentive mechanisms of markets of today, in the meaning that a company that does not externalize costs, that keeps internalized costs, that is more responsible and more sustainable, having higher costs and suffering as a consequence competitive disadvantage in relation to a dumper in all disciplines, which keeps externalizing costs and causing collateral damages. This could be inverted. This could be corrected if the more responsible company pays lower taxes, higher taxes, trades more freely, trades less freely, gets priority in public procurement, doesn't get a contract in public procurement, or gets cheaper loans or any other kind of finance, and this one gets a more expensive finance or doesn't get a loan at all or is not listed at all in a future stock market. This would be the correction of the central incentive mechanism and dynamic of markets, turning markets into common good oriented from capitalistic. Capitalistic markets, they are steered by profit orientation and counterpetition actually, whereas economic markets are steered by contribution to the common good and cooperation. Of course, the image of us humans would have to shift. I just mentioned that the Homo economicus is a pure fantasy, and neoclassical economists even admit that it is just based on assumptions. But then my question is, if it's just based on assumptions, why don't we assume that humans are cooperative, generous, and regenerative by nature, if it's just assumptions? And then we could think and design the economy differently. For instance, shifting from counterpetition to competition in the literal meaning. In Latin, competition means to search together and not against each other. Searching together would be a cooperative market economy. And we proposed a concrete method to incentivize cooperation and to disincentivize counterpetition, acting one company against the other. There are 20 cornerstones, which I just can mention due to the short time of introduction. And one of these 20 cornerstones builds upon Kate's donut, which builds upon the concept of planetary boundaries. And we build on Kate's donut in the meaning that we propose ecological human rights. These are limited per capita consumption budgets on the front side of the coin, and on the back side of the coin, these are protection rights for the planet and ecosystems. And those who consider themselves as liberals, they would not question or healthy we are.
Christian, we've lost your audio.
And then we could not immediately resolve in this case. Can you hear me again?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I try to share again.
It might be the video taking up the bandwidth.
So I can switch off the video. Let's see if I can turn off the video. Can you turn off my video, Edward?
I can't. Just on the bottom left corner, there's a camera. Just click on it.
I can turn it off.
Good.
You can turn off. Okay. So ecological human rights is an attempt to implement the donut. And here is a last example to limit inequality. The Economy for the Common Good proposes to limit inequality in income, wealth, inheritages, and the size of companies. Policymakers at the level of nation states are not ready to do that, although people ask for it in a huge majority. And that's why the
Sorry, Chris, I don't see your slides.
Okay.
Are you sharing the screen?
Yeah, I stop sharing if that's possible. Actually, I cannot stop sharing here.
Rick, can you help there?
I try to stop sharing.
No, it's not showing up at my end either. Try turning your camera back on, Christian, and let's see if we can find those slides.
Yeah, at the moment I have no access
Let me,
to any button, not even to my screen. Yes, now I can start my video. Probably my video is back now,
yes, your video's there.
but I don't have access to my slides.
Yeah, I don't see them.
Now, what can
Here, let me try one thing and then see
step
if we
out
can.
quickly and
Can you see the screen share button?
access. Let's see if I have no access to the Zoom screen at the moment. So only thing which occurs to me is to step out quickly and get back.
There. Now we're seeing your screen. Just have to maximize the presentation.
Okay, but I don't see it. I don't see it. I try to be back in a second.
Hey, Edward.
Yeah.
I got kicked out visually, so you'll have to pick this up. The screen is coming from my side, but it's jammed.
Okay.
I'm going to have to come in a second time, so just give me a minute or two.
Yeah, good.
Ed, I suggest we move on to another speaker because I think Christian is having serious technical issues.
Kristen, do you want to just finish without the slides?
I think we've lost him.
Now he's out. Yeah, okay. Kristen Mjoen, you want to take the floor?
Okay. So can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think Rick will have to come back in to take his screen down. But if you want to start.
Okay. So thanks for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished panel. I guess one way to start contributing to the conversation is maybe saying a few words about what motivated the work that I've been doing and the work that has been done with a lot of people, like another good friend and colleague of mine online, Bartura, who will be chipping in along the way. So over the last, let's say, 3 decades, slightly less, I've been sort of moving between, I would say, 3 social spaces. One of these spaces will be the academic space. Right now, I'm in government, so let's refer to that as a policy space. And for almost a decade, I worked in tech startups, which you could, I guess, refer to as the entrepreneurial space. Along the way, a lot of things happened, and not least of which were the emergence of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is kind of where we begin to touch upon many of the topics happening here today. So that's sort of one way to approach this. It's also interesting to bear in mind that the work that I've been doing and our collaborations with people like Bartola Bergstrand, they emanate from, I would say, from a context of living in the middle of nowhere. And for all the talk about sustainability, value creation, possibilities, I think it's interesting to note that most of us, including myself, including Bartola probably more so, we needed to figure out how can we make a difference? How can we be part of something, even though we cannot see the full picture, even though we do not have all or unlimited resources at our disposal. And once you sort of begin to imagine ways of contributing, it becomes apparent that you are not alone in this quest. And one of these sort of enlightening moments that kind of shifted my sense of how we can go about creating value in terms of sustainable local communities happened during last year's World Economic Forum. So again, my good friend Bartula was walking around this lab in Davos and filming a lot of these guys, and they were mostly guys, talking about big money and sustainable development. And we'd had permission beforehand to live stream some of these conversations to let's say, a global audience of entrepreneurs. And for the most part, people didn't really care much about us being there or filming. But at one point, and this was probably day 3 of the so-called Sustainable Development Lab, one of them asked, so is anyone actually listening to this live stream of yours? And of course, literally thousands of people at this point were listening in online, just as today, commenting and showing an interest. So the next question was, so what kind of reactions are you seeing? What are people sharing? What kind of questions are they asking? And I would have liked someone to maybe guess what type of questions people were asking. But to sort of keep this short, I think in a nutshell, most of the contributions online were sort of the type of contribution where people would say, wow, this is really interesting. And then moving on from that, how can I be part of this? And I think just sort of sharing that insight with the people in the room in Davos, all these very resourceful, insightful people representing billion-dollar fortunes, just seeing how baffled they were by a simple question like, how can I be part of this? The conversation just for a while literally quieted down, and then people were a bit confused, and then they just really moved on, because there was no sense of how do you approach this question of figuring out how can you make more people part of the solution in the end. And to me, this was so kind of eye-opening. Maybe I've been blind for a very long time, but this is also very promising, right? So we're, even though as I mean, most of the introduction so far has been testimony to, there are so many challenges right now. There are also so many opportunities in terms of people wanting to be part of a movement, in terms of developing, even by way of the Sustainable Development Goals, a shared vocabulary, a shared sense of meaning and direction and goals. And we've never had more capital at our disposal, more opportunities, more technology. So what happens to the types of local communities like the one I live in Norway, or the one Bartola lives in the middle of the forest in Sweden, right? Because obviously, at the local level, you will not automatically have sort of the quality of spaces that you need to truly mobilize this global initiative, global pool of talents, global resources to make a difference at the ground. So we basically started looking, and this search has been ongoing at least for the last, I would say, decade, for some characteristics of these societies that, even though they're constrained in sort of their access to resources, to potentials, to ideas, how can we begin to bridge these possibilities and maybe even eliminate some of the constraints linked to being somewhere in the middle of nowhere? And I can make this very complicated, but I think if you sort of were to interpret this as at a very personal level. And this is, I think, where a lot of us, including myself, a lot of the time, seem to get the process of sustainable value creation, I guess, in a sense, wrong. Is we don't really see ourselves as part of something needing to change, depending on which space we are in. So I could be an academic, I could be an entrepreneur, I could be a policymaker. And I can have a lot of intentions and ambitions on behalf of these other spaces. We didn't really find this fourth space, which we increasingly have come to recognize as the learning society space, where you can truly engage in a conversation about how does the internal quality of each of these spaces come to impact the shared results, the shared value creation that happens across these sectors, if you like, of society. So for a very long time, we tried to figure out, so what would this learning society or this fourth space look like? What are the characteristics, and what are the sort of very practical implications of trying to bridge the gap between local potential and realizing this potential through connecting that local potential to people and passion and purpose beyond the individual, beyond one sector or one organization. And this is kind of an ongoing effort of ours to develop this as a theory and as practice. And so when I've sort of been invited into conversations like this today, it's kind of on the back of these ongoing experiments. And right now, just to sort of jump forwards from the motivational part of my introduction, we have had the chance working with multiple cities, a lot of cities, both in the Nordics and globally, to begin to work with the UN as well on setting up structures that in important ways echo some of the findings that we've been developing at the local level, working with academics, social entrepreneurs, and policymakers, and to test this at the national level, for instance, right now in Norway, as an approach to societal innovation. And of course, with the time constraints imposed by the 2030 agenda and the sort of greater awareness across all these spaces of the need to do things differently to speed up the process of sustainable development, I think there's an increasing recognition and an appreciation that we need to invest in this fourth space. We need to invest in systemic innovations. So then this begs the question, so what would be sort of the operating system for a new type of sustainable value creation? And basically there's three levels to this. So one has to do with a basic shift in mindset, a basic shift in preconceptions about what predicates some of this societal learning that I'm referring to. And again, if you want to take anything away from this, it's basically, and you can test this on yourself, it's really interesting. We developed basically 3 L's that we refer to as listen, link, and learn. And it might seem a bit sort of simplistic and stupid, but it's really about the L at the personal level and even at the institutional societal level, about figuring out what characterizes those communities that can keep quiet for a while and listen for other entities, other organizations, other cities, if you like, that are trying to achieve many of the same things that you seem to be struggling with at the local level. And you can be in a room of people and you're bound to have someone in that space who's trying to do many of the same things you are, and for some reason you never connect. You don't find these people easily. And I think a lot of the time it's not because you can't find them or that we don't have the social media or the structures to do this. But it's basically a sort of an assumption that you're alone in this quest as a community, as an organization. And instead of collaborating or building partnerships to realize these sustainable development goals, it translates into a competition, which in economic terms is really, really inefficient. So the first quality of these spaces, this fourth space, has to do with the quality of listening and how you figure out what to listen for. The second part of the conversation, or the second L, has to do with linking, and there's a whole lecture to be done on social capital theory and stuff there. But in the simplest of terms, it's really figuring out, what do I represent as an individual, as an organization, or as a community that can support or sort of help sustain, amplify, if you like, others that are trying to achieve the same goals. And of course, this, I've been teaching management executive programs for a long time, and this doesn't sit well with the traditional ideas about how you manage resources, for instance. Just giving stuff away, if you like, to attain some kind of goal just doesn't make sense within a sort of conventional idea of sustainable development within managerial terms. So already at this stage, at the sort of the operational level, it becomes really hard because you need to sort of rethink the whole idea about how you engage with the world and what you can control, and embracing, if you like, random open process. And the third L has to do with learning in a more pragmatic sense. So you can listen in and you can find someone, you can realize ways of combining your resources to begin to develop shared experiments. But in a sense, you cannot really say that you've learned anything before you can prove in practice that things are actually improving at the local level and people can see a change in their lives, in their quality of social engagement, in their relationships, in their health, and in their impact on the planet. So building on these three L's, listening, linking, and learning, we then began to do sort of a post-mortem, if you like, of some of that, to try to find some of the components that can go into developing this more systematically. So what would be the building blocks if you wanted to go from a more sort of descriptive theory of change to a more normative theory or practice of developing local communities? And again, this might be a bit complicated, so I just put some of the key words out there. But one thing has to do with rethinking the space in where value creation happens. So we started playing with the first of four components, which we refer to as the playground. So this is basically where things happen on the ground. This is where we activate different types of capital. This is where local initiatives and local resources, even natural resources, meet available knowledge at the local level and connected through social media, if you like, to knowledge communities, entrepreneurs outside, emerging technologies. And without this playground, nothing really happens that's worthwhile. We also realize that this is not just about one space. It's more useful to think about this as a series of streams that emerge into a bigger river across time. So how do you begin to link these local playgrounds? And this is where sort of the second of these four dimensions come in, and we refer to this second building block as the journey. How do we begin to journeyfy these playgrounds so that one thing does not stand alone? How can we sort of eliminate, like I said initially, the fact that we are living in the middle of nowhere, that we have limited resources, limited insight, limited knowledge about available technologies to do great stuff at a local level? And through journification, we began to explore ways of democratizing, for instance, access to technology, access to great questions, access to knowledge, resource, and even to funding. And the third element has to do with the charter, which is basically our emerging idea about what does really sustainable value creation mean. So we've heard already about donut economics. I referred to the Sustainable Development Goals. We have all these constructs emerging that can be used as a framework to think about what sustainable development and sustainable value creation might mean. But this is negotiated and it emerges across time. And the fourth kind of building block of this learning society system, if you like, has to do with what we refer to as the lab. So these are the tools you will be needing to navigate what we could refer to as a knowledge economy. So we need tools that are appropriate to do this kind of work, to work on social relationships across time and space. And this is not where you necessarily need a hammer or a propeller. It's a different type of laboratory we're talking about. And then taking this operating system, taking these different components, we have then begun to apply this in practice across cities and developing frameworks that ultimately begin to forge this fourth sort of communal space, where the policy space, the knowledge space, and the entrepreneurial space merge into what I would refer to as the learning society space. And then we have had the chance now over the last, specifically a couple of years, to test this both at the city and national levels and begin to see some of the results. What are the sort of net effects of this kind of approach to sustainable value creation? And many of these ideas can be very sort of strange and unpredictable. And this is kind of what makes this work very, very difficult, in the sense that it's kind of a lot of the time counterintuitive, especially if you've done like me and spent a lot of time in academia studying traditional management theory. But it's also super interesting, and it's very rewarding by way of seeing how these networks of people and passion and purpose evolve and create material consequences at the ground level. And you have some very inspiring people like Bert Ora who've been doing this for a long time, basically trying to figure out what happens when we start to connect these places and people in the middle of nowhere to one another, and exploring this question about how can I be part of the conversation, how can I be part of the solution. And I hope maybe Bert Ora, you could perhaps say a few words about why you've been doing this and your experience so far.
Yeah, I can add. I don't know how much time we have now, but I can add a little bit. Of course, we have. I've been connecting, I said, people, passion, and purpose for the last 15 years, and for me, it was very much a curiosity of finding out what's going on here in the world with geography and culture, and of course, with internet, that opportunity came. So now you can travel digital and physically in ways that you never could before. So, and I was interested early in finding out how we could really build this social capital and get something going on the ground. And like Christian said, the last 4 years, we have developed this framework where we build journeys and we integrate communities. I think we have around 1,000 communities in 150 countries right now that we are connecting, and at all levels, from government to business to communities, and many of what we say today, influencers there. So we can quickly speed up the process of sort of democratizing of the resources out there. So I would like to invite you. I met John there earlier at Social Capital Market some year back here. So it's so great to see people come back here that you met before. So I think we are also building, we have a lot of material I already shared here in the Facebook live streams if you want to see more in details about the models there. So we build a framework now and a manual of how you can be part of doing this in a community or a city in other places. And I see it resonates a lot with what other actors are doing here, and we could easily amplify each other's initiatives there. And the corona has opened, even if it has been a lot of bad effects, it's also like this time in history where, for good and bad, the governments and people are reflecting a little bit and can take a retake and go forward. And suddenly, I think for many of us who have been digital, I would say for a long time, sort of early adopters trying to get the decision makers on board, suddenly they are here. In a few months, they have been starting to adapt social technology. So I think this is a chance where we really can speed up the process, because in the end we have the climate change, we have the big problems out there, and in order to do that, we can't speak forever. We need to connect the resources and achieve some results in the right direction as well. So yeah, I think that's enough for me at the moment. We will do a lot of activities ahead here, so we can follow up later. We have next week we do a rural playground here in Sweden where we'll test, and we are part of a Pakistan big event in mid-August, and then in late August we do together with Christian here the kickoff of the Norwegian city networks, where we will bring this process forward, where we can integrate them and learn from each other and amplify resources.
Thank you both. That was excellent. We'll go back to you guys in the panel. If we have time, we're kind of running a little bit late. I'd like actually to give the floor now to Brett Scott. And Brett, if you can introduce yourself shortly.
Sure thing. Great to be here. I'm Brett Scott. I didn't actually prepare anything formal. I just thought I'd respond or kind of like riff it to see what other people were saying. But I, for a long time, have worked on alternative finance and alternative forms of money systems. I wrote a book in 2013 called The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, Hacking the Future of Money. And I have a new book coming out next year, although it's been a bit delayed by the pandemic. And it's all about the money system and sort of cash versus digital money, financial automation, and the sort of emergent forms of alternative finance that might kind of respond to that. I thought maybe today, like the thing I'd try and add, because lots of the speakers have already gone into some of the kind of like particular movements. I thought maybe I'd go a little bit like more meta and sort of sketch out a broader framework. I see like the title I was given in this talk was the CEO of Altered States of Monetary Consciousness. Altered States of Monetary Consciousness is my new website and YouTube channel. I'm not actually the CEO of that. It's just like my personal platform. But I came to that name through like various things. I actually, like many years ago, kind of went on an adventure into the financial sector, and worked in what's called over-the-counter derivatives. And I don't know if you guys know, this was like in the middle of the financial crisis, and derivatives are kind of like, they're one of the most abstract layers of finance. If you have to try and like imagine finance as this like system that's built, if you imagine like the earth, and then there's like these sort of systems that are built up on top of it. Like derivatives are probably like layer 8, if you're like somewhere up in the stratosphere, essentially, of finance. And they're kind of like one of the most abstract and large scale forms of financial instruments. Essentially, they're just large bets on things that happen down below. I mean, this is like a visual abstraction. This is not actually what literally happens, but just this is a way of thinking about the sort of derivatives world. And you can kind of see it if you like rock up in a financial sector somewhere. And you can see the sort of towers of finance, and you can kind of like, there's this extremely like large scale and abstraction to those buildings, right? And then the reason why is that the types of activities that go on in those buildings are large scale and abstract. Okay, and you can contrast the experience of being on one of those tall towers of finance with the experience of being like in the soil of the earth, right? Like that's where the sort of like the base layer of the earth is like soil and microbes and like raindrops and stuff like, and then there's all these layers built on top, and eventually you end up in this like highly abstract realm of derivatives where like the things you do have this massive impacts that ripple across the earth, but you can't experience them directly. You're essentially like disassociated from or you're kind of like numb to the effects of your actions. sorry, this is like a bit of like a long spiel that's just going on there, but like the whole sort of point is that our finance system in many ways is, if you had to imagine our world almost like in terms of like a superorganism, and you had to think about the financial system as a kind of like, almost like a mind layer, you could describe it as being disassociated and numb. All right, it sort of like pushes us in these directions that are very like damaging to our body. If you had to imagine this like, yeah, I think about things in very sort of fractal terms. You can see like, at the level of our own bodies, we can understand when we are like disassociated and like disconnected. But actually often we can't see that at the level of the highly abstract level of an overall economy. But that's actually how our sort of economy works at that sort of meta scale. And so the task of altering states of monetary consciousness is essentially about how do you sort of take the finance world and start to actually like embed it and make it kind of more holistic. And a lot of the sort of projects we've been talking about today essentially are different angles on that same kind of that basic objective. Maybe just one last thing I'll just say in terms of strategies of over the years. I've worked on many different alternative finance projects and so on, and like the strategies tend to like target different elements of a system. And there's the world of alternative economics or alternative economy, and then there's the world of alternative finance. And these are often interlinked, but in some ways, many traditional activists who are concerned about an economy, the way they tend to like approach it, they'll say like, you know, what we need to do is like change the corporations, you know, target the CEOs of corporations, you know, or change the way that a business does business. Whereas the intuition in the alternative finance world, which I tend to be part of, in the alternative money world, is if you can change the way that the sort of the financial sector is structured, it will in turn alter the way that business more generally is done. Okay, and of course these things are all interlinked, but it's a sort of an orientation towards how you change an economic system, is to sort of target the financial sector. And of course, you can't really separate the financial sector from the economy more generally, but it's sort of like one way to sort of orientate yourself. And maybe the last thing I'll add is that kind of going back to that picture, and sorry if I'm just like motor mouthing here, I'm just like literally making this up as I go. If we started up that picture I was saying with like, you know, there's these abstract finance layer like hovering over the earth. Well, the sort of like the point where we kind of the monetary system is like the base layer of the financial system. You know, like many things in the finance world are about manipulating money flows and sort of moving money flows through like financial instruments and so on. But the intuition in the alternative money community is that if you can alter the base level like money layer of a society, everything else will change, all right? And so a lot of the work I do on like alternative currency has this like intuition that it's like if you can somehow figure out how to target that money layer, everything else can kind of fall into place. But it's one of the hardest elements of an economic system to try and change. I hope this is like somewhat coherent. And if you guys want to check out more of my stuff, because I know we don't have much time, like go check out, I've got this new website, which is like very new. So it's Altered States of .money. I'll put a link in the chat. But there's a whole new group of us as well who's starting to like work on next wave crypto systems. I don't want to talk about cryptocurrency because it's like a really like messed up world. But there's a bunch of us in the alternative currency movements who are saying right now, what we got to do is like take some of the wisdom of the old alternative currency communities from, you know, way back in time and hybridize them with some of the new technological models that are coming out to make much more interesting hybridized sort of decentralized money systems. And maybe tomorrow there's the seeds talk will have some element of that type of thinking. That's cool. Thanks.
Thank you, Brett. That was really interesting. And actually, we should have had you for tomorrow's session. Would have been a good discussion. You're welcome to come back. Okay, we're running a little bit late, so go right away to Anne-Marie Verhoeven. Can you please take the floor, Anne-Marie?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Yeah, it's very great to hear everything here that's being shared, and to also, I'm very curious to see how we can move forward. So I am very much dedicated to finding new ways of working together and to serve that also in multi-stakeholder settings. With a focus on heart intelligence and the rebalance of the masculine and the feminine. I'm the co-founder of the Hague Center for Global Governance, Innovation and Emergence that started out of the Center for Human Emergence in the Netherlands, and which, Jim, you actually really made a big contribution by inviting us into one of your State of the World forums in 2009 with Peter Mary and Morel and Lisette and many others. And there we really practiced, as what we're still doing, how we can serve the transition by bringing together multi-stakeholders and let them really work for a higher purpose. And of course, Humanity Rising is doing exactly that. And I think all of us here are doing that. So it's great to really, see how this is moving forward. We are very much rooted in the whole world view of Jude Caravan that was presenting here on the 1st of July and working with Erwin Laszlo. And last year I was invited into the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, which underwrites my dedication to really practice evolutionary leadership. And I think everything that's being shared here really can serve that if we work together even on a larger scale. And of course, that is also what Ubiquity University is standing for. Cities and eco-regions play for us a vital role, and I'm very happy to also be working very closely with Marilyn Hamilton and the team there that was also here earlier this week and inspired us here to continue this journey. And with the City Transformers with Bente Milton yesterday, where for me it's really very important that we are bringing together the different voices in cities, eco-regions, Earth actually. And of course, the focus of City Transformers is really clarifying, giving voice to young people to come to the table and to share with us their view of the world that would work for them. And to what we are serving with the City Transformers, and now also thanks to these sessions with the help of Kate Rayworth and her team with the Donut Economy, to see how we could really come together with their perspectives and give voice to them, let them have a voice in the design of our places and cities, and in that way actually enhance also their agency and their contribution to society in many different forms. And I hope that the alternative economic systems that you've been sharing and the financial systems can really serve young people to find a place in society, because that is so needed. If I listen to my kids, my two girls, they often say, yes, Mom, you're in this working for the new, but I need to first learn about the old systems in order to make sure that I can survive and support myself. And I would really want to see that all these children and all these young people can contribute to the world that thrives for all. In that way, we can also tap into their capacity to build this new story and use the new media, the virtual reality, the ways that they look at the world and bring it into form and bring it into place. I think that can be really very inspiring. So I would like to call to us all and also to the speakers to continue this collaboration, of course, but then to show up in September. Because September will be the next steps after World Unity Week and the continuous journey of Humanity Rising. And we will be organizing in that September month, which is also on the 21st of September, the celebration of UN Peace Day. And there are many, many groups now that are seeing that that is not only a UN day, but a day of all people. And it is 75 years of the UN as well that we're celebrating. So let's get some next steps and show up in that time and be there in the different events that will be taking place and make sure that we can collaborate, because that's the opportunity that we have now through this large scale collaboration using the internet, and also in, of course, coming together in all kinds of places. But we're being now so served to practice connecting globally and locally. So I would really like us to come into concrete actions. And I think the Ubiverse can give us a space for that, as can many other places. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That was another dimension of the conversation. How can we actually collaborate? We actually have a session on the 29th about 2 initiatives that are focused on how to bring all these initiatives to collaborate together. One of them is Bounce Beyond, the other one is Gain. It would be interesting to have you in that discussion. We're running a bit late, but I would like to give Christian Felber 2 or 3 minutes to see if he can wrap up his talk, which he didn't finish. And then we can open it to a panel discussion, if that's okay, Jim, with you. So Christian, if you can connect again and just wrap up your presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you for these last 3 minutes.
You might have to take your camera off.
I
use a lot
a
of
little bit
bandwidth.
too high up in the mountains. Yes. Yeah, the economic movement is collaborating organizations. One
It's not working, Christian. We're not listening. We cannot hear you clearly.
What about listening? You cannot hear me?
It's very, is your camera off? Maybe that will give you better bandwidth so we can hear your voice at least.
The camera is off. Can you hear my voice?
Now I can hear you better.
Okay,
Yes.
then I just finish talking. Yeah, this was one key element. We will propose that governments and parliaments listen more to the citizens, and we developed a game, a democracy game that we played in 25 countries so far to just, for instance, limit inequality, and people would limit inequality between the highest and lowest. And that's the art in Austria is 1,000 times, 350,000 times. This is one example how sovereign democracy could achieve better results than the current democratic status quo, called post-democracy by Colin Crouch and others. Wrapping up, the movement started 10 years ago. Now we are in 33 countries. We have created 170 local chapters. 3,000 businesses have joined, and 700 of them have done a common goal balance sheet from all branches, but not the major ones. You might not know the movement because no single transnational corporation has joined so far, because they prefer greenwashing, change business in more theory. Working with municipalities and communities, with the city of Barcelona, Stuttgart, also Amsterdam or Vienna, just to name a few. And what cities do is They buy a balance sheet for their own company or for the city. They promote public procurement or economic promotion. And then, of course, they invite citizens to create in a participatory manner. Amsterdam is doing in the donut economic project. They are 100% complementary. And actually, we are also working with the city of Amsterdam, just not known that much. Well, and collaborate locally with businesses, municipalities, cities, or universities. And of course, just to mention it, in our bodies, we have a gender equality, because it was also remarked in the chat as for this panel, and 50% of our spokespersons and ambassadors are women by definition. And yeah, just to add that if you got an appetite to join the movement, you will meet, amongst other values, gender equality in our movement. Thanks for giving me these.
Thank you, Kristen. People in the chat are saying we can get you back whenever you have a better connection.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, it was a little bit broken, but I think we got the message very clear, and the opportunities also very clear. We're a little bit late, so what I propose is that we go an additional 1 or 2 minute round with all the speakers. We can do it in the same sequence that we had originally. As a wrap up, if you have any wrap up comments you'd like to share, and then we can see we have time for a few questions. So, John, would you like to do a 2 minute wrap up? Actually, all speakers could turn on their camera again and their microphones.
Sure. Boy, that was great. I was messaging Brett on the side. I started my career at JP Morgan in the derivatives business when it was, before it was a dirty word. So, but I totally resonate with his depiction of it being the extreme abstraction of finance. So, but I guess as a wrap up, I would like to first also kind of agree with Anne-Marie's point about finding a way for the next generation to participate in this work. You know, I'm always asked by, you know, college students, young professionals, you know, this is all fine and dandy, but how do I get involved in this, and how do I make a living doing this work? And I don't have an easy answer to it. I think that's one of the real challenges of trying to keep an economic system alive while you transition to a new economic system at the same time. And the current 20 and 30-year-olds are really in the vortex of that challenge. And it's one of the many challenges that generation is facing. And it's overwhelming to really think about as a parent. The expression of this, just to share kind of, and we all need to figure out how to collaborate better, and this idea of network weaving, and our contribution to that is an initiative that Edward is very involved in called the Regenerative Communities Network, and you'll find information about it on our website, capitalinstitute.org. But it's very much, I think, a way for the next generation people to roll up their sleeves and get involved, even if it's not a full-time day job. At this point, but it's very much aligned with a lot of this conversation. We certainly need an RCN hub in the Nordic countries. So Bert will be coming back to you on that. But the idea is sort of this idea of learning to learn together and sharing that experiential learning, as opposed to sitting and reading papers and books. And my view is that is the university of the future, and we've had that idea validated by some prestigious existing universities who say, boy, I wish I could get my students out into the field where this work is actually happening. So I think that's a very hopeful sign, but it doesn't make it easy and it doesn't make it fast. And I guess my final point is just to kind of go back to where I started on the importance of principles, first principles. You know, if you simply look at the constraints of planetary boundaries and all of the ideals of what we want for human beings, but take away the possibility of exponential growth, you're left with a very real conundrum, and we can't pretend it's not a conundrum. And the power and the hope and magic of this regenerative process is that through aligning with how living systems work, we can unlock potential that exists, but we don't currently see. And I've experienced that in my own investment projects many, many times. It happens everywhere. If you work, you know, one of the principles is the edge effect. So if you work the edges between different systems, you unlock potential. And if we had time, I could give concrete examples of this. And so my premise is that we need to do all this work. And if we do it in alignment with the way living systems work, there will be abundance available to us that we can't yet see because we're locked in the old paradigm. And that, to me, the most hopeful thing that I hold every day as I move into this work. Thanks very much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, John. Christian, you want to try to give your final wrap up, Christian Felber?
Sure, I try to be hearable. I would like to pick up the collaboration issue once again.
Can't hear you.
And models. One of them, contribute. Can you hear me? No.
Very, very cut up.
I think we'll reschedule you, Christian.
Yeah, we cannot hear
Down
you.
from the mountains.
So, Christian and Bert, you want to wrap up?
Yeah, cool. So again, thank you very much for setting this up. It's been amazing listening to the input from all these great people. And I think I'm very hopeful, not just because of the quality of conversations we're having. For us in particular, the 2019-2020 has also sort of represented a transition from, I would say, the fringes of theory and practice on learning societies to a more sort of mainstream conversation about sustainable value creation. So we were recognized in 2019 as a UN Center of Excellence on SDG city transitions. Some of the framework thinking was recognized by the EU Commission as one of the most important innovation across all EU programs in 2019. And a lot of the work moving forward is really about sort of taking down the complexity in this work, and this is where Bart Ora's initiatives is super important. So right now we have literally 200 sites globally where we want to begin to replicate this kind of approach. So how can we make this local value creation into basically a suitcase, a manual, some really simple, globally available technologies where local entrepreneurs, local knowledge communities, local policymakers can begin to bridge these spaces, not just amongst themselves at the local level, but really beginning to journeyfy their playground as part of a greater whole. And I think this is super inspiring, super promising. And I'm really, really glad that this is becoming more mainstream. And I think this is probably the case for most of the people speaking. So this sense of not being totally alien anymore is kind of gratifying, I guess. And I'm sure Bartola has probably felt more alien than I have for probably 15 years. Might sort of take some pleasure in actually being part of the mainstream now in a big way. So that's kind of cool and very inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, just add to that what Christian and the others are saying. I think just to look at the amounts of invitation and the networks emerging almost daily, I can say, around the world now, is very promising, where you start to weave this in a very organic way. One of the big challenges I see in this, of being sort of, like Christian said, in the fringes or a bit in the new economy setting, is that how do we get the traditional actors on board? And that has been super interesting to work with Trondheim City and cities in Norway to try to bridge a bit of the traditional economy and collaborative projects with all this bit of chaotic emerging new economy, with everything from cryptocurrencies and crowdfunding and, you know, all these new concepts. So because I don't believe, or I think it's a very hard way, if we are like waiting for some kind of the traditional economy will fall apart in some way. We need to get them on board and to build these frameworks where our way of building or developing democracy can fit together and improve with the new potential of our new tools that is emerging and is very, very good, and we can connect in and share knowledge and connect resources in a much better way. And using these frameworks like you presented initially, John and Christian, that so we have, how do we know that we navigate in the right direction? It's not only to connect the resource, we need to know also, do we go in the right direction? So all these frameworks and tools at different levels are very important to build going forward. And learn from each other. What, for example, what we maybe don't have today in this conversation is a bit more what's going on in Asia or in Africa and other parts of the world. So it's also interesting, very good ahead that we get that view and picture into this conversation. But a lot of potential ahead to connect these different you can say flows of energy and potential.
Thank you. Nice. Anne-Marie.
Yes, well, I think we can experience joy when we're so deeply connected to our life purpose and our life force, which I feel is resonant here, and to not hide away, of course, from the pain and the shadow and the complexity of our experiences either. Because through those difficult moments, we either speak truth or we silence our truth. So how can we really come out and share with the larger groups of people that are perhaps not so much already connected to us? And the invitation is all the time to not close our hearts when it becomes complicated, but to really let it flow and let our heart intelligence show us the way. And the real practice, of course, is really in the action itself, not only in our own communities, but in the wider communities. So please show up in September as well with concrete actions in these multiple convergence rooms where we can go into co-creation with people, and then we can come back into Humanity Rising and into the universe to really take it forward and to map and track and to learn with each other, because it's really that working together that I think with larger groups of people that is going to get us somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to Jim.
Although we should probably get a final word from Brett Scott. Brett?
Oh, sorry, Brett. Sorry.
Lots of panelists, it's fine. I'll be maybe just the last thing I'll say is like I grew up in this town in South Africa called Durban, which is like a surfer city. And one thing about surfers is that they're really like they can get very good at riding waves, but often don't actually understand where the waves come from. And I think this is, and actually those waves might be a manifestation of some like plate tectonics somewhere, it's caused an earthquake and then the waves arrive, right? And I think it's very similar. A thing often happens with entrepreneurs and stuff who often get very good at sort of riding tremors, but don't necessarily understand what's actually going on behind the scenes. And in general, like our news more generally, on a day-to-day basis, we're barraged with all this like surface level tremoring all over the place. And it's causes a lot of anxiety for many people. And I often think one of the things I try to do is to spend not very much time watching the news, but more time kind of like getting down to what might be at the sort of base layers of that. And there are many things that are at the base layers that have already been mentioned, but obviously one of the ones that I want to mention, of course, is always the monetary system. And I want to encourage people to go and sort of meditate on money. And I mean, with the proviso that there's a lot of charlatans out there right now as well who are trying to answer this question for people. If you go there and you say, "Hey, what is money?" you're gonna get 1,000 charlatans who are trying to tell you their story about it. So you got to have your wits about you when you're going on. There's a lot of kind of like historical fear mongering as well. And actually, the monetary system is fundamentally ambiguous. It brings people together, but it also simultaneously disconnects them. And this is one of the fundamental things around currency design people must be thinking about. Is that there is a lot of ambiguity to it, and that's why it's so fascinating. And maybe the last thing I'll say is like there's a lot of people working on all these alternative projects, and they often need support. So one of the best things to do is go and help them out by trying out their projects and actually, giving them feedback on how their projects are going, because it's quite lonely when you're building alternative forms of economic systems and nobody wants to use them. So that's a nice positive activity to go and do. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, did I miss anybody else? I don't think so, right? Sorry.
And take a few minutes, Ed, to just summarize the panel and your thinking. We've got a little bit of time. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'm on the implementation side, and exactly that, Brett. Sometimes you feel alone trying to change a whole country, and you don't see government signing on. You don't see a lot of the power groups signing on. They're actually fighting you. So my bringing together all of these great conversations we had today and the thinking that's behind them, I'm more and more convinced that what we have to do is bring all of these things down to the people, to the community level, to the bioregional level. We can regenerate a country in spite of government, and the government will fade away at the end because it's not really needed anymore the way it's functioning right now. At least in my country, we can still do that. I'm not sure you can do that in a country like the US under the current conditions. But it is the people that have to start understanding this. So we really need to get down with simple language and with examples of implementation. Cryptocurrency, which we'll discuss tomorrow, has been complex. People get kind of mixed feelings because of these false statements that come out. But unless you get people actually using it, it won't make a difference. Regenerative economics, if people don't understand that it's not about the money, but the whole system and how they can use it, because we've been brought up with the money and the consumption and the malls and the spending. To be able to change that, we really need to go into a broad educational level, telling people what is really important. We've taught people that we have to take care of nature. And so people think that planting a tree and recycling a bottle is enough. They're doing something. We should have taught people that nature takes care of itself, but for us to be alive, we need nature to function. And that's a whole different mindset. If we would have taught that instead of the first, we would be in a different position. So with regenerative economics, it's something similar. I mean, we've been taught the wrong way ever since we were in kindergarten. I mean, my parents gave me an allowance to go buy candy. So it was and every time I did something good, I'd get, a bigger allowance. If I did something bad, the allowance would be taken away. So the whole behavior system is set up, and we see people thinking that they're successful because they are riding an expensive car, even if they're paying monthly fees and bank loans to ride that. And people, when that person gets off a luxury car, people say, oh gosh, that person is really successful. And there's nothing of success in shown through the car you drive, but that's the way society has been built. So to reverse this, we really have to go into the spiritual component and the community level. So Anne-Marie said, you know, that collaboration, and Christian was just talking about collaboration when he got cut off. How do we get to that scale of community, collaboration, and empowerment with all these marvelous alternatives that we have, and that in many cases, they're not even in a language that can be understood by regular people, by a municipal leader, by a local government, by a family, by a farmer. So I think we still have to do a lot of work in translating this into something that's really useful and applicable by the general public, because it's there that the solutions will come. I don't believe the solutions will come from the UN. I don't believe they will come from governments or from corporations. Even if the SDG says corporate sector will solve all the SDG implementation problems, I really don't believe it. It will come from the people. But we really need to bring this down to a understandable, and understandable many times as examples, showing people. And that's where the Regenerative Communities Network, which John mentioned several times, is so powerful. We have true demonstration sites where people can learn how it's done. So that's my wrap up. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. It's you're right. We come down to implementation, ladies and gentlemen. There's no time for anything else. And I wanted to just pick up two strands that came. Christian Muen is making a very interesting point. You know, say 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, all this alternative, generative, regenerative economics was really on the margins. What the pandemic has shown incontrovertibly is the impoverishment of the current system. That's now obvious to everybody. And so what was the marginal is now moving into the mainstream. And we're in that kind of that in-between moment. And I think you were talking about that, Christian, which is quite extraordinary, that the collapse of the system, as Ed's pointing out, the people are understanding that the prevailing elites and the prevailing institutions are not going to solve this problem. And the reason is actually simple. It's Einstein. The consciousness to produce the problem isn't going to solve it, right? You need guys like John Fullerton and Brett Scott and Christian Muen and Christian Felber and Berdala Bergestrand and Anne-Marie Verhoeven that are coming from a different place. And I think that's the excitement of Amsterdam and Copenhagen and cities around the world and countries are beginning to bite the bullet. And what that means is that there's the beginning of the mainstreaming of what was just a short time ago, you know, an idealistic never, never land. And I think all of us should take note of that. And I think Ed is absolutely right. It's got to come from people demanding it and not waiting for X or Y institution, whether it's corporate, government, civic, or other, to kind of step in and solve it for us. Each one of us has got to take the bull by the horns and realize that the entire fate of the earth rests on us and our capacity to be radically collaborative with everybody else that's trying to rise together. So I just want to affirm this and to thank everybody for this contribution. I apologize that Zoom, as they say, sometimes Zoom happens. And it happened to Christian Felber. But Christian, you should take note of everybody in the chat who, in spite of the technical challenges, was hanging on to your every word. And so we want to reschedule you so you can have, maybe when you're down from the mountains, another session where you can go into more detail. So I want to thank everybody, and this has been splendid discussion. And Ed, once again, we're in day 4 now of the 7-week, and Ed's responsible for all this, everyone. So I just want to thank Ed Muller for putting together an extraordinary panel, and he's going to do it again tomorrow on generative economics with another panel. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow again, same time, same station, here on Zoom at Humanity Rising between 5 and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European Time. We'll see everybody in.
Let the kids thank us.
Yes. Yes. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Christian, Bert, and
Thank
Marie.
you, Edward. Thanks, Jim.
Brett.
Good to be with you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks
Have
to
a good
everybody.
day.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
That was good, Jim. I need to speak with you more, Anne-Marie.
Oh, lovely. I would love to. Yes.
Yes, there's that gap in many of the initiatives of actually generating a community to move forward. That's what Bounce Beyond is about, if we get it really rolling. A lot of these initiatives, I mean, just to think, Christian's effort to get over 3,000 companies, over 33 countries on the individual basis with one assistant, it's not fair.
Yeah,
It's not fair.
totally.
I mean, we really need to push this to another level. Yeah. And quickly.
Well, I think that's what Humanity Rising is trying to do, absolutely. But I think at the same time, also these other initiatives like like I was, sharing, where we're coming together in co-creation, because the format here is, of course, to have a panel and, of course, a chat. But there, it's really having more time that we can really get together, so that we can then also.
Anne-Marie, what I'd love to do is be in touch with you about what you're doing in September to make sure we can profile it.
Yes.
We're pretty busy in September, but let's see what we might be able to piece together.
Yeah, it would be really great if we can do that. And I'm trying to get everybody also to go to Ubiverse. I don't know how much is happening there, but that's what we keep on saying. Okay, we're stopping now, but go to Ubiverse.
Okay, guys, I'm going to end the call.
Bye-bye.